Hello everyone, this is Professor DePaulo. Welcome you back to Psych 265 Fully Online. And today we're going to talk about writing the methods section for the manuscript for the study that we're doing, the COVID health behavior study. So let's look at Brightspace and how we're going to access the information and write up the methods section. Now, the introduction section I'm looking at currently and grading currently. That was a little bit more work. Some of you weren't used to writing this kind of format of a paper. So that was a little more challenging. This assignment is very, very basic. Mainly because the method section for a survey is limited. I mean, we can go into more details with like reliabilities and validities, but we're not at that advanced stage yet. So I'm going to give you a very simple method section to correspond with the study that we're doing. So let's look up the method section by going either to weekly guide or to the written assignments tab. So let's look at written assignments for now. And we want to know how to write it. So I'm making this video guide for the method here that you're watching. Here is the link for submitting the method section as a PDF. And where it says writing the method section webpage, that's where you're going to get the basic document, how to write the method section. So it's a PDF file, click on that. It's very, very basic. So you're going to have the word method centered in regular 12-point text. So you don't need to italicize it or you don't need to bold it. Just write method, center it. And then you're going to have three subheadings: participants, materials, procedures. These should all be in italics. And then you're going to start the writing below the subheading. So below the line that says participants, right underneath that line, you're going to start your writing in terms of participants. Now I'm looking at the data currently and I'm going to analyze the data for you. And I'll provide the information for what you need to write in your method section. And there's not much to write here. So when I say right below, let's see if I'm doing participants like this. Right. I want that flush left. I also want that in 12-point font. Let me do Times New Roman 12-point font. Standard font. I want that italicized like that. Okay, you're not going to write a colon or a dash. You're just going to space and start to the left below it. And then start your writing your participants here. And then you're going to do the same thing with materials and the same thing with procedures. So you're always going to start writing on the line below the subheading. And obviously, the subheading shouldn't be the first line. It'll be down here like this. And then you'll have method in the header here, right? So I can have that centered. Center that. So you can have something like that. Method in the header. Participants, start below it. Start writing below participants. Then materials, then procedure. Okay, so your participants here. Usually I like to do the analysis only on the semester's classes that I'm currently running for this topic. But since we have very small sections right now, and there's not many people that completed the survey, the sample size would be too small. So I'm going to combine a couple semesters worth of participants here, multiple sections. So we have a total here of 183. And then you could write and sample size, right? Actually, no, it's not 183. Whoops. I added wrong. 183 and 487. Sorry about that. Typo. So 187 participants. 187 participants, made up of 151 females, 32 males, 4 non-binary individuals. That gives you 187. And you also want to indicate the racial breakdown. I mean, generally you'd want to indicate race, ethnicity if you're using it as a variable in the study. We're not going to use race, ethnicity as a variable in the study, a meaningful variable in the study, but it's good to indicate it anyway, because we have a very diverse sample, and that diversity of the sample will increase, the external validity of the study, actually. So let's look at that. So the ethnicity breakdown for the study is 89 Hispanic, 46 African American, 32 white, 17 Asian, 2 Native American, and 1 Pacific Islander. So there were a lot of breakdowns in terms of ethnicity, race, ethnicity. So I'll put that in the next line there to separate it there. So there were a total of 187 participants, 151 were female, 32 were male, 4 were non-binary. The ethnic breakdown of the sample was 89 Hispanic, 46 African American, 32 white, 17 Asian, 2 Native American, 1 Pacific Islander. And I'm sure there were a couple that, that might not add up to the 187 because there might have been several occasions where people didn't indicate, or they indicated maybe more than one race. I mean, you could put that as an option if you're looking at race, ethnicity, where you can have multiple. Or you could actually have like an option where you could fill in, and then the participant actually has to type it in. I'm not sure if I had that or not. Probably not. And then the age range. Age range was between 18 to 56. So basically for the participants subsection, right, the section under participants, you're just going to write all this information down. You're not going to list it. You're going to write it in complete sentences. So you're going to tell me that there were 187 total participants. Of those 187, 151 were female, 32 male, 4 non-binary. The ethnic breakdown was this, and the age range was between 18 and 56. Now, I kind of like to have the age range in there because it tells you basically not just the diversity of the sample, but what you're dealing with. Most of these participants are clustered around 18, but you have a few outliers that are a little bit more towards 56, 56 being the most extreme value. But still, 18 to 56, it's a decently diverse sample. It's not perfect, obviously. Is it representative of the population? Well, it's a convenient sample, first off, in that I'm recruiting out of the sections of Site 265. It's not a random sample, which would be ideal. A random sample, every member of the population would have an equal chance of being included in the sample. And in this case, we don't have that. I mean, most psychological samples or samples for psych studies are not random samples. You could do a random sample, but it'd be really hard. Even to get a random sample of BMCC students, you would need to have the entire BMCC enrollment as your population, and you'd have to randomly sample out of that, which means you'd be getting people on the weekend, in the morning, at night, distance. It would be a lot more work. Would the random sample be better than what we're using, the convenience sample, in terms of, you know, the ability to generalize our results from the sample to the population? Probably. But the vast, vast majority of psychology studies do not use random samples. A lot of times they use samples where you're getting them through the subject pool. So students are required to sign up for the subject pool, and they have to complete X number of hours of research or X number of research studies, and they're kind of forced to do it. It's either they have to do the study or they have to write some other paper. We used to have that when I was a PhD student at Rutgers. We used to have a subject pool, and that's how we got all our subjects. It's a little bit better than a convenience sample. We're using an entire class, but it's not a random sample. So most psych studies aren't using this. I mean, we're not really too concerned with drawing conclusions from the sample to the population per se. We're more concerned with the results of the study. And then if someone wants to really check the external validity, they can replicate if they want. Replication is running the study again and getting the same results, hopefully. And unfortunately, within psychology, there's a lot of failure to replicate for a variety of reasons. There's a replication crisis. You don't see the replications too much because you can't publish them. Almost never do you see a replication as a publication. And so if you can't publish the replication, most researchers don't want to run them, even if they're replicating their own research. I know that sounds bad, but that's kind of where we're at right now. So that's participants. Materials. So for your materials, the only thing you want to put down here is that a class survey that measured COVID-related health behaviors was completed by the participants, and then tell me some of the variables that are in there. So some of the variables in that COVID health behavior study that we're using are anxiety, right? Depression, somatization, attachment is in there, empathy is in there, vaccination attitudes and behaviors is in there. What else is in there? Health anxiety. We have generalized anxiety. You have health anxiety as well. Alexithymia, which is the inability to identify emotion in self or others. So people that are high in alexithymia, they have a hard time labeling their emotions, hard time identifying their emotions. So these are some of the variables that are in there in that survey. So you just want to basically say that a survey measuring COVID-related health behaviors was administered. Several of the variables measured include all these variables. Now, if you were writing this up for publication, you would want to go into each of these measures and talk about them. So I would probably want to give a small paragraph about each of the measures that I use and give their reliability and validity. So I would say something along the lines of the emotional closeness in relationship scale was used to measure attachment style. This scale consists of 36 items that are measured on a 7-point Likert scale. And then I would say that I would give the reliability of the scale, and I would give some of the validity of the scale if I have that information. You don't always have validity information, but validity information is important because it tells the reviewer that's, you know, correcting you or basically evaluating your article. This is why I use this measure. So I use the ECRR, which is a common measure of attachment, because it's both reliable and valid. And there's multiple types of reliability. Generally, we use internal consistency, which is called Cronbach's alpha. And then for validity, a lot of times for validity, you're either going to do a regression or correlation. You're going to do some kind of statistical, basic statistical analysis where you're looking at the correlation between the scale you're using and other established scales or other established measures of that construct, if you have that. So that's a little trickier to do. And not every study has that, but it makes the study stronger if you can show that the measure you're using is valid. If you're making up your own measure, there's no way to tell that that measure is valid. I've written my own scale for a couple studies, and my own scales that I wrote up for studies were terrible. I didn't like them at all. And sometimes you think you know what you're writing, and you can come up with the perfect items, and a lot of times it's a little bit harder to write up a scale than you think. So my personal opinion with regard to using these measures is use measures that are already established, unless you're measuring something that doesn't have a validated established metric. Like, don't reinvent the wheel and come up with your own measures of anxiety and stuff, because a lot of times those measures are going to be difficult or problematic. Sometimes you can come up with a good scale, but even if you come up with a good scale initially, you need to cross-validate it against some other, with other samples. You can't just write, hey, this is my scale, I'm going to use it, it's a great scale, I can then cite my scale, I'm going to publish it. Well, yeah, it doesn't work that way all the time. Your scales can be really problematic if you make them up yourself. So that's materials, and then we have obviously procedure. And then for procedure, all you're going to do is talk about a survey was completed online that it took approximately 20 or 30 minutes. Students were given credit for a research and psychology class. That's all. It's very basic. So participants, I've given you all this stuff on the participants. We're using a bigger sample than what we have from our classes in this semester because we had very few responses. So I needed a bigger sample size. So we're going to use 187. Materials, the scale, and the variables that you're measuring. Make sure that you're talking about a COVID health-related behavior scale. Was taken and it measured these variables, or measuring these variables, right? And then the procedure, just that participants took approximately 20 or 30 minutes, and they received class credit for it. And that's it. There's not really much to write here because we're just doing a survey. If this was a more complicated, study where we're doing a complex manipulation, then yes, you'd have a lot more in the way of the procedure, especially. But even if you wanted to publish the study, you would then want to write up the measures of these variables I listed here. It's not necessary to do that here because you're just learning. This is very basic. This is like the entry level. This is what it looks like. I'm just getting you used to writing this in this style and thinking this way. But eventually, if you go on further, you're going to be writing much more detailed sections for your method, where you're going to be describing all these scales that you use. So I talked about the attachment one, the ECRR. I used the For depression, I used the GAD scale, the PHQ, I'm sorry, the PHQ 9. Patient Health Questionnaire 9. It's a 9-item scale of depression. I also used the GAD-7 scale for generalized anxiety. And I would want to talk about all these scales. Now, these are well-established scales. I'm using well-established scales here. Nothing, I use the Toronto Empathy Scale. These are all well-established. So there's nothing here I'm making up except for the questions about vaccination attitudes, because there really isn't a well-defined set of questions that compose a scale or a subscale on this. This is all new. But these variables, these personality variables or behavioral variables, emotional variables, these are all well-defined. And I would want to write out their validity and reliability information if I were publishing this. But for now, I'm trying to keep it very simple. So that's about it. Hopefully I didn't go too off the topic here. If you have any questions, let me know, but it should take you about 10 minutes to write this up, maybe less. Save it as a PDF file. These are free points. So if you thought the introduction was hard, this is your chance to get free points, because I've made this as simple as possible. Remember, participants right here, write these in complete sentences. Materials, a online survey that measured COVID health-related behaviors was completed. The variables measured were all these things, right? And then the procedure, the online scale, was completed in about 30 minutes. It took students received credit for it, because there's really not much going on here because it's a survey. So that's about it. Hopefully that helps. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, I'll be back to talk about the results and the discussion next time.